I actually came to theater very late. I have friends who knew they wanted to be in theater from a very young age. They were making plays in the backyard, and I was not one of those people. I was, my family didn't go see plays. But then when I was in college, I went with friends to see a production of a piece called North Atlantic by the Worcester Group. It's just a very experimental group in New York City. And I remember I still remember images from that production. It literally blew me away. It was a visceral experience. The whole evening, the space where it took place. I'd never seen stories told that way. It was electric, and I really do. I go back to that evening, and that was the evening where I said, I want to do that. I'm not quite sure what that is, but it made me feel like nothing else, and that's what I wanted to do.
And was it early on that you knew you wanted to write?
I always wrote. So I wrote a lot of not very good poetry when I was a teenager, and I always wrote stories. That I was somebody who always wrote. My mom has she had a photograph of me when I was very little before I knew how to write, and I was just pretending to write. And you could sort of see on the page it was just some sort of preschool hieroglyphics that I was, but I wanted to write from a very young age. Yeah.
I love that. I didn't know that you came to theater later too. I sort of
Mhm.
assumed you've been doing it from early on. Um, well, so much of your work is inspired by myths, fables, fairy tales. You're often responding to other works, and I'm just curious what the roots of that are for you, where that comes from, and what inspires you.
Well, I mean, like many of us, right? Those are myths and fairy tales were some of the earliest introductions I had to story. And I think what stuck with me and still is with me now in my well into adulthood is that they're kind of like riddles. So you have the pleasure of a story, whatever that story may be, whether it's the story of, Orpheus and Eurydice, or whether it's Rumpelstiltskin, whatever that is. But even at a very young age, I think part of the appeal of myths and fairy tales is they're innately mysterious. Like you can tell that there's sort of a root system underneath, and then there are things that are unanswered. And from a very early age, I just remember turning a lot of those stories over in my mind. They would stick with me, and I think in large part because there were these unanswered questions, which as I got older, I realized were not simply questions of story or character, but kind of, existential questions like, why was she locked up in the room and tasked to, make straw into gold? Like, why did he do that to her? And, why, like whatever those questions are, sort of pointed to sort of, bigger questions.
Yeah.